Hey guys, and no, this movie does not suck. You guys remember that from Spy Kids?
The first of which is, I'm not your uncle.
That scene always makes me laugh because it's like, you don't need a mustache to be an uncle.
Love, tragedy, joy, something that people will feel belongs to them.
But my opinion aside, it's an interesting conversation to see that critics aren't taking too well to this Freddie Mercury Queen biopic. If you want my elongated opinion on the movie, I'll link it in the description or card right above me. It's spoiler free, so you can check that out. But in this one, it will be spoiler filled, and I'll be touching on maybe why these critics are so heavily panning it, and maybe why as fans don't give an F what they're saying. There's a lot of interesting factors that I think could go into explaining that Rotten Tomatoes score for being so poor in a movie that was really exceptional and well made in my opinion. Did it have flaws? Heck yes. Did it have things where it seemed very basic and paint by the numbers? Of course. But on that, does it really weigh enough to sway your opinion that you should not go check out this movie? Alright, so to start off, we have to begin with the background drama of this movie. Now, before this movie hit pre-production, it was set to star with Sacha Baron Cohen. He was attached to make basically a hard R biopic of Freddie Mercury's life. Now, the reason they wanted to go in this route is because Freddie Mercury ended up dying of AIDS. And it was very heavily rumored that Freddie lived an extravagant life going from partner to partner. Now, heirs to Freddie's story and band members heavily disagreed with this, as I think they wanted to be more respectful in how people remember Freddie and tell his story. So when it came down to them writing a PG-13 script and holding back on some of the nuances of Freddie's life, Sacha Baron Cohen was like, I'm out, this isn't what I want to make anymore. And thus we got Rami Malek and Bryan attached to this project. Now, I didn't think that was a bad combination at all. Rami Malek's a great actor if you've seen Mr. Robot or even Night at the Museum. I mean, he's a great Egyptian in that, really solid work. And Bryan is the director of some of the better X-Men movies. Okay, so that's said and done right there. It's a PG-13 version. We're gonna kind of water down some of the things that made Freddie Mercury a little infamous. Moving on from that, it turns out during production, Bryan was fired because he wasn't really showing up on sets, had some personal issues, and he was kind of having arguments with Rami Malek. That's when they brought in a replacement director, Dexter Fletcher, which is a great name for a private detective in my opinion. And he finished about 20% of the movie that was left to be made. Now you would think some of these critics are complaining that, oh, you can so tell the difference in directing here. You can see where the cuts were made awkwardly, and that's not really the case. The movie actually runs pretty smoothly, and it's hard to tell what was Dexter Fletcher and what was Bryan Singer's vision. But a behind little scene tidbit that I don't want to get too gossipy in, because that's not what I do here, is some critics might be kind of hard on Bryan Singer because he's been known to dodge and get into some sexual allegations. He's been accused of it multiple times, sort of facing court trials at the moment, and while he really hasn't faced a repercussion or punishment in the industry like a lot of people have who get accused, there is some heavy weight to his shoulders, so anything he kind of does and missteps is looked at 10 times worse because of this. Now, like I said, I'm not going to get too much into it, but that is a case that I've seen in a few Rotten Tomatoes scores where they bring that up when it really doesn't have anything to do with this movie. And lastly, before the movie is released, one more thing I want to touch upon that I think is a big thing that actually deterred this movie from being really just enjoyed and recognized by the public or even critics was the timing and when this movie's being released. This movie is being released at a time where a lot of Oscar contenders are being thrown out there. We've already had movies like A Star is Born, Can You Ever Forgive Me, Beautiful Boy. These are all movies that come with a certain tone that are being marketed for a certain audience to eventually get a campaign going to be part of the Oscars in 2019. By setting this movie at this time frame and really heavily in the marketing towards Rami Malek's performance, you're putting a certain stigma in our minds into the critics following this movie until it's finally released. You're telling us that you're extremely confident in your storytelling, you're extremely confident in your character development, and this movie is going to blow us away and get us talking about Oscar contention. Some people think I'm waving too heavily on that, but if you look on a lot of reviews, they'll mention great performance, could have maybe won an Oscar, but not given enough material. We can all agree that Rami Malek's performance is amazing in this movie, and that it really captures what Freddie was in essence. But the main problem is not with his performance, it's with the material he was given to not really explore the character fully and give us a complete notion of that's going to be an Oscar contender for sure. It's a crowd pleaser and entertaining movie. The marketing for this type of film should have really have gone towards an early summer or even February release date where it's not really being stared upon of, okay, Oscar time, let's see what you got, Mr. Bryan Singer and Rami Malek. But the thing that should always just be judged upon is the movie itself. So let's look at the movie itself. One point heavily made throughout reviews and even in my own personal take is the band members and how they're brought into this story. Now, if you really want to look at it, Bohemian Rhapsody is basically a Freddie Mercury biopic. 75% of it revolves around him, 25% is around the band members and other characters. And this is actually a real detriment to the movie because while we all know Freddie Mercury was basically the star of Queen and we all sympathize with him and his story and he was the one that made it a driving force and instant popularity, the movie throughout it gives you tidbits that he didn't write all the popular songs, that he didn't come up with all the popular lyrics, and at times he wasn't even present in the studio while some of these songs were being recorded. The band members are reduced to one-liners and facial expression. There was one scene in particular that really irked me and was basically just meant for exposition for the audience members to understand where these band members are in their part of their lives, because we're focusing on Freddie, but we gotta update you on what the band's doing also. It's a scene in particular where Freddie is walking around his new mansion. He's talking to his drummer, Roger Taylor, played by Ben Hardy, and while Freddie's going on and on about like, we're gonna furnish this place, we should have a little pizza party, eat off the floor if you want, we get the one-liner to update us at where he is at this point of his life. He's like, well, Freddie, I got kids now, I got wives, I got responsibilities. It's lines like that that happen all throughout the movie where we don't really get to see the development of the band member characters, where we get an insight to what made them tick, to why they even started the band. So it would have been interesting to get a background story on these characters and see what made them write a song like I Love My Car or create the tune for We Will Rock You as a background and not really of how literally the music was made. It's how their mindsets were that led them to the music being made. Aside from the band members and holding back on them and focusing on Freddie Mercury, when it comes down to the overall story, big chunks of it are actually to show you, the audience, how some of their most famous songs were made. Bohemian Rhapsody, We Will Rock You, conversations about we want to be different, we want to stand out, and that's what's going to make us get on top. And then while that's all great and dandy, we as audience members and critics are already in the theater because we like that song and we understand why it's a big hit. And to give us a full frontal of they didn't believe in us, they didn't think this was going to be a hit, but it did. It's the movie always foreshadowing something that is an eventuality that we already understand because of our present time. And in real life, Freddie was a very private person, hiding his sexuality, lying about his disease, lying about his own name, and the movie never explores why that happens. We don't get to understand the inner workings of Freddie and why he decided to go all flamboyant after his first day of being on stage. If I can put this in sort of a metaphor, diving deep into the person that was Freddie Mercury, it's like if you're always going up to a house, you're knocking on the door, but when it opens, you never step inside. Or in Freddie Mercury's case, a closet. Movie always rides that line of we're about to touch upon it, we're hinting at it, we're foreshadowing it, but it never explores it, and I think that's actually what's going to kill Rami Malek's chance at winning that Oscar, or even being nominated. But the final nail in the coffin for many critics and people who left disappointed with the movie will come with how Freddie Mercury's relationships are handled. There are basically 3 love interests in this movie, and one heavily outweighs the rest of them, which is actually the detriment of the movie, because the one that outweighs them all is sort of the villain of this movie. Now, to drive sort of a conflict going, because every movie of course needs a conflict, instead of going with Freddie's disturbed mind of am I bisexual, am I gay, how should I handle this lifestyle I live behind doors, instead of using that as a conflict for the movie, it uses this person as sort of the symbol and metaphor of how he got into that lifestyle. It is essentially Paul Prenter who ruined Freddie Mercury's life, broke up the band, and almost ending his career entirely. When the actual important people of his life, Mary Austin, the person he was engaged to before he came out as gay or bisexual, and most notably wrote the song Love of My Life for, or the person he spent his remainder of time before dying, Jim Hutton, are really brushed off to the side to give this love interest a full chunk of the movie, giving Freddie Mercury the impression of gullible, easy to manipulate, and hard to sympathize with. But the reason I'm gonna say all this stuff doesn't matter, and who cares if it's not gonna be up for Oscar contention, it's still a badass movie. It's still an inspiring film. It still captures the magic of what Queen was, especially in that final concert scene where it recreates the Live Aid performance. The last point I'm gonna leave upon is think of it like this. Eventually, we're gonna get a Michael Jackson biopic. I'm very excited for it. I'm a huge Michael Jackson fan. I can't wait for that to happen, and hell, if this movie makes a lot of money, we could see it sooner rather than later. But when it comes time for that biopic, how much of these sexual allegations towards children are we gonna include in that movie? Is it gonna be a very big focal point? Or is it gonna be something like in this movie where it's hinted at, it's foreshadowed throughout the entire movie, but not completely explored? And the reason this movie did that, and the reason the Michael Jackson biopic might go ahead and do that, is stereotypes because how do you want to remember Freddie Mercury or Michael Jackson? Do you want to remember Freddie Mercury as a talented singer, an amazing songwriter, and a misfit in a band of misfits joining together to create some of the best songs we've ever heard? Or are we going to bring it down to Freddie Mercury was gay and died of AIDS, and oh, he made some great songs also? That's what I think this movie was going for, was exploring the best parts of Freddie Mercury while not ignoring the stuff that eventually led to his death. This movie comes off respectful, entertaining, and ultimately a crowd pleaser, but I don't see how that's such a bad thing if you're pleasing a crowd. Let me know what you guys think about the movie, if you think the critics are just really exaggerating and taking these small negatives out of context, because I guarantee tons of people are going to love this movie. And I think score aside, you should ignore it and go check it out for yourself and judge the movie on your own merits. Be sure to like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at 3C Film Review. But as always, I'm Chris. Take care.